Iceland has been on my bucket list for a long time. And when it came time for my husband and I to decide where we would take our baby moon, the last big bang of an adventure before we enter parenthood, this felt like the right place to go. We were so excited for a chance to see and do some incredibly unique things, as well as slow down and rest, and reflect on what lies ahead in our biggest adventure yet, becoming parents. For a little background, my husband and I are big-time travel nuts. Since we've known each other, we've been to almost 30 countries outside the US. For one, we're huge suckers for diverse, beautiful landscapes, natural wonders. There's just nothing like getting your breath taken away by beauty that's been around since before humans even existed. That said, we also love exploring unique cultures, experiences, and foods. And lately in our 30s, we especially love going places that enjoy a slower pace of life than America. We're not big fans of feeling like you need a vacation after you get back from a vacation, you know? Rest is essential. Also, did I mention we love food? Getting to eat new mind-blowing foods is one of the highlights of every trip we take. And this baby moon was no exception. If you're new here, I'm Ellen Broen. Thank you for watching my channel. Lately on my channel, I've been sharing a lot of my journey through pregnancy and my thoughts as a life coach and a creative on life and business in general. So if that interests you, please do hit subscribe, and I hope you enjoy this very epic travel vlog to Iceland. We picked Iceland for this trip not only because it met all the criteria of our favorite kind of place to travel, but also we wanted to go somewhere epic and unlike any place we'd ever been before to celebrate the fact that we're entering an epic and unknown place in life as new parents. But one thing I didn't think about when we planned this baby moon was that I had just spent my entire first trimester feeling like absolute garbage. I shared a whole video on my symptoms if you want to check that out after this video, but let's just say I felt like shit for basically 3 months straight. We booked this trip just a couple weeks into my second trimester, and I honestly wasn't sure if this trip was going to be a good idea at all. So the trip started off with the first big hurdle, a red-eye flight. I'm already not a big fan of red eyes, and I try to avoid them at all costs. And as a pregnant person who already wasn't sleeping great and was prone to swelling and felt kind of crappy, I was honestly a little worried. We decided to splurge and got business class seats, so I had a small fighting chance of getting some sleep. We flew Icelandic Air, so unfortunately we didn't get any of those fancy lie down, fully flat kind of seats, but we did really love the extra space and comfier chairs. I also came prepared with compression socks, which worked moderately well for the swelling, but we managed to get only a couple hours night's sleep, and by the time we landed in Iceland at 6 a.m. local time, Matt and I were exhausted. We picked up our rental car at the airport and headed straight to our hotel, but we knew there was little to no likelihood we could get to our room more than 7 hours in advance of check-in time. So we dropped off our stuff and walked into downtown Reykjavik. The town was pretty sleepy still, and weather was overcast and cool on this September morning, but the colorful and quirky shops and restaurants were already getting us excited to explore. However, our first priority was, of course, food. We found a place with great reviews saying it had really delicious, large breakfast meals and coffee to offer, and it did not disappoint. We milked our meal and beverages as long as we could, not knowing what we'd do with our first day in Reykjavik. Eventually, we strolled back through town, soaking in the unique culture of its street art and murals, until we decided on the perfect place to go next to wind down and relax after a long day of travel. A close-by thermal bath and spa. Now, another thing we really didn't know how we would handle is this whole hot springs thing. You see, during pregnancy, it's recommended that women avoid all sorts of hot tubs and hot baths and anything that can raise your body temperature too much. It's especially important for first trimester, but I was just a few weeks into my second trimester and still had my concerns about getting too cooked, as Matt and I called it. This place, though, offered the perfect solution. separate pools of tepid, warm, and hot springs. With temperatures indicated on each pool, I was able to enjoy the tepid pool with a brief dip in the warm pool, while Matt could periodically pop over to the hottest spring and come back to cool down with me. Soaking in those warm, salty waters did our bodies a world of good after that long overnight flight. And not to mention, the sweeping views of the bay added to a very relaxing afternoon. Next up, a late lunch. And boy, did we stumble on an incredible find you must visit if you go to Iceland. Never have we experienced farm to table quite like this. We were able to not only eat out of this world burgers and ice cream produced from pasture-raised happy cows, but we could literally watch the cows from our table. We had a view of the miles and miles of beautiful pasture land just outside the window, and there was even a glass wall separating us from the feeding troughs in the barn. It was super unique, albeit slightly awkward experience of making friends with our food. We had a good time narrating the interactions between two particularly animated cows while we chowed down on their cow cousins. We made the scenic drive back to Reykjavik in time to check into our room at the hotel, where we relaxed for the rest of the evening. A local gave us a hot tip that some northern lights might be out tonight, so we took a short drive out to see if we could spot them. But since we had a Northern Lights tour booked for the actual next night, and we had no clue what we were doing, we decided to call it early and just went to bed. The next day, we got up early and went to a breakfast place that quickly became our go-to spot for a delicious bite, only a block away from our hotel right in downtown Reykjavik. We became cinnamon roll connoisseurs by the end of our trip, and this was definitely one of the top rolls in Reykjavik. Plus, it was a super cute place to enjoy a leisurely breakfast. My pregnant self couldn't tolerate just a one pastry and coffee start to the day. Fueling up for lots of walking and exploring meant we looked for big, filling breakfasts every day. One thing that was also super special about the area where we stayed was that it was right in the heart of downtown Reykjavik, and it was right down the street from the water. We even had a waterside view from our hotel and loved watching the sunrise over the mountains and the sparkling bay. Highly recommend. We made our way to our first planned itinerary location, the iconic Blue Lagoon. Although we enjoyed the thermal baths immensely the day before, this gigantic hot spring was a marvel to behold. The water was a shade of blue I have never seen before, and all around the resort were piles of volcanic rock that made us feel like we were on another planet. The size of the spring was also shocking. There were so many different pockets of the lagoon to explore that we easily passed 3 hours there and felt like we barely managed to see the whole thing. The package we bought included 3 different face masks, which were also a staple of the spa-like experience. The detoxifying but very salty water of the lagoon meant our hair and skin were coated with a thin layer of minerals, so it was really nice to have different moisturizing masks on our faces. Something you may also be wondering is, again, the conundrum of avoiding hot tubs as a pregnant person. What we researched and learned on site is that the temperatures varied dramatically based on where you were in the lagoon. Some pockets were extremely hot and some were on the lukewarm side. As we explored the whole lagoon, our strategy was to hang out for long periods in the cooler parts of the lagoon. And when we went through a patch that got hot, I would hoist my legs around Matt's waist like a human wheelbarrow, keeping my belly above water in the cool air. This was honestly a hilarious and wonderful memory from the day. Even if you aren't pregnant, I highly recommend being a human wheelbarrow in water. It's like being a kid again. I'm sure we looked absolutely insane to other guests in the pool, but hey, everyone was enjoying themselves as they saw fit, and this made me feel at ease knowing I wasn't letting our baby girl get too hot. When we left the Blue Lagoon, we headed to the small beachside town of Grindavik with one mission and one mission only: eat as much as we could of the iconic Icelandic comfort food, lobster soup. We did some interneting and found this fishing village featured in a renowned lunch buffet, serving limitless homemade soup and bread with views right on the water. The place had an interesting warehouse-like vibe that clearly had an awesome live music scene at night, but the star of the show was without a doubt that soup. With full, happy bellies and silky soft skin, we made our way back to our hotel to rest for a little bit before dinner and our late-night Northern Lights tour. We got a quick but delicious batch of appetizers from a food hall close to our hotel and then headed out on the bus tour. The 4-hour tour was, for the large part, a lot of sitting around listening to a terribly monotone tour guide spout off a few facts about the Northern Lights here and there, and then leaving uncomfortably long gaps of silence for sometimes 20-minute stretches at a time. We had a lively commentator sitting behind us who had a lot more to say about the tour guide than the tour guide had to say about the Northern Lights, which made for a much more entertaining ride for us. We stopped at 2 remote sites to see the lights and only managed to catch some faint glimpses at the first location. What you're seeing here is actually even better than what we were able to see with the naked eye. In person, that looked like a pale green cloud. Through the phone, and with a bit of enhanced saturation, you can see the movement of a more intense green light across the sky. Overall, we feel really lucky to have seen the lights at all, since the likelihood was slim to see them at this stage in the season. But it was not a remarkable wonder to behold when you take into account standing silently in the cold for a couple hours hoping that pale green cloud would turn into something more. We made it back to our hotel very late and very jet-lagged that night, happy for a relaxing day in Reykjavik to follow this very eventful day. It was day 3, and we woke up to a phone call you never want to receive. To back up for anyone new here, my husband and I own a few businesses, and one of them is a destination Airbnb just outside New York City. We decided to open the house for the week that we were away for a couple who desperately wanted to rent our place for their wedding party to stay in during the week of their wedding. And here we are, thousands of miles away, on our baby moon, when we wake up to texts, emails, missed calls, and photos of our house trashed by these guests. The guests had blown an electrical circuit in the kitchen from a massive catering company they hired for an unauthorized rager of a party. My neighbors were texting me asking if I knew there was a very loud party going on at our house, since they know we strictly forbid such events, and letting us know that there were so many cars parked out front that they were blocking driveways. Plus, our driveway had a mountain of trash the size of an SUV sitting in it. And our brand new interim property manager, who was using this trip as her test run for the role, had messaged the guests under my name, approving all sorts of allowances that we did not authorize. And she did nothing to intervene on the electrical outage, which had cut off the refrigerator or any of the house rule violations. So here we are on her baby moon, waking up hours after a peak crisis because of the time difference, and we now have to contend with unruly, dishonest guests, a host of upset neighbors, and a totally untrustworthy property manager. Anyone watching this who owns a business knows that as a CEO and leader, these kinds of breakdowns are incredibly stressful. You want to take good care of your customer, but the customer has crossed an unacceptable boundary that you must correct. You want to get your hands dirty to pick up the trash and take care of the mess, but you can't physically be the one to do it. And worst of all, you want to trust your team to deal with the issues appropriately, but that team member is causing more harm than good and is better off fired than putting out the fire. It was a nightmare. We hopped into action, called in backup reinforcements, and handled the crisis as best we could. But man, did it kill that vacation vibe. I thought about not including this story in our travel vlog, honestly, but then I realized it might be an important perspective to share, not only to my fellow business owners, but to anyone who's encountered a crisis at home that threatens to ruin a special occasion or trip. So, how did we handle this without it ruining our trip? We declared the day a rage day. There's no footage to share with you about this day because it was a day we designated to just bitch and vent. Take long, brisk walks by the water to let off steam, and do everything in our power to solve problems over email or phone while accepting that it sucked big donkey doo-doo. We gave ourselves the permission and space to let this just be a part of the trip while setting healthy parameters. So, what were our ground rules? Number 1, This crisis energy was confined to that day only. We had one day to discuss, problem solve, ruminate, and be pissed off about the situation. And once we handled as much as we could from afar, we promised each other that we would not let it spill into the rest of the trip. We didn't want a dark cloud hanging over our baby moon. Number 2, we gave ourselves full permission to feel upset, angry, frustrated, violated, helpless, indignant, and everything in between. But we promised we would not take it out on each other. This was only mostly successful because normally one of us would hold down the fort in not taking stuff personally while the other one rants. But since we were both pretty deep in it, there were definitely moments of tense snapping at each other. The intention was there, however, to channel those feelings away from each other and not at each other. And we both did the best we could. And number 3, we respected each other during the decision-making process on whether or not to fire our property manager. Ultimately, we knew it was the least shitty choice out of several shitty choices, but firing someone, especially in an important role like this, is never easy. So we made the decision together as a team and handled the repercussions together as a team. No I told you so's if something didn't work out as planned, and no pointing fingers and blaming. We woke up on day 4 of the trip ready to make the latter half of the trip even better than the first half, despite this very egregious hiccup, which you will hear about in my part 2 video of this trip, where we hiked between 2 tectonic plates, by volcanoes, through geysers, above and below skyscraping waterfalls, and on top of glaciers. But none of that compared to the life-changing birthday surprise that I received on this trip. So be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in part 2. Bye, friends.